All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Our folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have back Dr. Timothy Shaw. Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. And great to be back.
All right, appreciate it. So Dr. Shaw studies the impact, origins, and implications of moral injury. He's undertaken original research into how laws of war and deeper considerations of ethics and justice can inform our understanding of moral injury, the signature sound of contemporary war. Tim has taught ethics at University of Sydney and holds a research master's investigating the implications of just war theory, the most uninterrupted, longest continuing study of moral decision-making known in the Western world, on psychological distress arising from the preparative agency. In addition, Tim received his doctorate on the topic of moral injury and the question of why killing is traumatic using the ethical optics of French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. Tim, welcome back.
Oh, thank you.
So let's just take a second here and orient those of our listeners who haven't yet checked out your first episode here. In short, what the heck do you do?
Okay. Well, for the past year, maybe a bit longer, year and a half, I've been doing not much apart from reading and writing and going on an incredible journey, looking into the origins of how to define the term moral injury, and also how to think about a definition that has a treatment or some form of treatment built into it.
Okay, so a definition of moral injury that has a treat. What do you say more about that? What do you mean by?
Yeah, I know it's different. So, as most people are aware, the field's compiled of three main strands. You've got the clinical strand, you've got the religious or the spiritual strand, and the cultural strand from Jonathan Shea. Now, the field has had these have been three outstanding pillars for some time now, and the problem is that there's no common lexicon language that unites or connects all the fields together. Without that, it's very difficult for a concept or an idea to be easily spoken about, and that's the ideas and the definition which I'm going to present, they do not refute any of the current ideas or models. They just frame them in relation to each other and also relation to themselves.
So you're talking about these three pillars of moral injury?
Yes.
Okay. We've got the clinical, the religious, and the cultural.
Yes.
Okay.
And hopefully a fourth model, a unifying model, a philosophical model.
Okay. Now, before we get into this, and you said you were going to disclose a new definition.
Yes.
Why is this so important to you?
Oh, well, it's not something I rolled over. I thought I should do this. When I and when we get into the definition, you'll see the importance of it, because what lies at the center of moral injury is something that lies at the center of human existence. I don't believe that the importance of the ideas of moral injury, they flow through from the importance of Judeo-Christian thought, and they interconnect with society at many different points. When I first started thinking about it, I saw, much like PTSD in the 70s, I saw the the potential, and definitely I foresaw that moral injury would start with the veteran cohort, but as we're starting to see, it does migrate into other cohorts in society, and just how to think about that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And some of those other cohorts, for example, are what?
Medical first responders, medical professionals. In fact, even, for example, people that have had trauma from COVID, or from understanding, being let down by people in authority, or what have you, or anything. And this is causing some very grievous psychologies, and it's quite difficult to understand how to think about them.
So before we start getting into this newer, is it fair to say expanded definition, share with us what's the understanding of the current definition of moral injury?
Oh, okay. The current definition, it's a complex beast. The church believes that moral injury resides with them in a way, and they define moral injury as a soul sickness, and maybe not even a sickness, right? So something that's natural, or something that is inbuilt and innate in us. Jonathan Shea, who's the cultural proponent, he understands moral injury as the upset from being let down by someone that holds legitimate authority. The clinical definition is failing to, or enacting or failing to enact actions that go against one's moral compass, so to speak. The thing that links all these ideas together, however, whether it be the religious strand, the cultural strand with a legitimate authority, which may as well be God, right? Mm-hmm. A legitimate authority for a relationship being let down by a legitimate authority at its very core and base. As we as humans, when we think about that, we do think about that in a very profoundly divine way. And also then, when you act or fail to act or fail to prevent, then your idea, you can take it right down, and this is what I'm going to do through the aid of Friedrich Nietzsche, and trace it all back to some very profound ideas that underpin Western thought.
So most, I think, generally speaking, it's fair to say that a lot of people, a lot of therapists at this point, when they think of moral injury, we think of veterans.
Yes.
Right, who've come back from war. What are you suggesting now? What are you proposing with this newer definition?
Well, I underwent a fabulous moral injury course with Volunteers America that was run by Rita Brock, and primarily the people that were coming and really connecting with this were pastoral care professionals and people that are in the ethical and moral space. It wasn't necessarily soldiers, but really the counselling community is coming in to try and engage with this idea, because when it comes down to it, and it is becoming an all-inclusive PTSD-esque idea. Mm-hmm. Not only do you have to understand it for yourself, you start to have to understand it for other people as well.
Okay, so let's talk about how things evolves for you. How did you come to this new definition?
Well, I was speaking with you the last time about the just war tradition, and about the importance of some of the later ideas that have come in with crimes against humanity, and all these new ethical paradigms that were released into the world post-World War II. And it is such a nebulous topic that I was finding it very difficult to put in all the information. And I also had to put in the information in relation to the movement or the ideas of Christian thought as it has evolved over 2,000 years. Because you could argue, and this is what I argue, 300 years ago, there were no psychologists and there were no psychotherapists. And we understood moral injury, or and I'll go into what the content of that particular moral injury was through our relationship with the church or relationship with a priest. So if we came back from war, I mean, it's not as if you didn't go and see a psychologist or a psychotherapist. They just didn't exist.
Right.
And those ideas that surround those traditions, they didn't exist either. So putting all these ideas in, I was looking at a philosopher that had started to take these ideas seriously, and the person that has taken them the most seriously is the gentleman Friedrich Nietzsche. And I thought, oh my God, this is a nightmare, because I thought, I have never, ever, it is just so complicated and everyone is talking all these different strands. And I thought, okay, pause, will to truth, will to power, what's going on? And then I started to look into his work and I started to look into his life. And I saw something that was very strange for me. He wrote a book that he only sold 40 copies of when he finished it, right? And then year on year, not like, one every 2 years, but year on year on year on year, for the next 4 years, he wrote monumental pillars of philosophy that have informed the 21st century. And I thought to myself, where did these ideas come from to year on year on year to be able to write this? What is the significance and what is the methodology that's been written about in this in this book? It's called Thus Spake Zarathustra, and that book. And when I looked at that book, I thought this is even worse because it was given out to German soldiers in World War I. It's been lambasted for. It's been, the reputation of the work, and I'll go into this and the providence of the work. Is scary. It's very scary, but it's very powerful. You've got Carl Jung that based his whole psychotherapy on that book. And you think to yourself, what's going on in this thing? And Carl Jung, he said that it's the best example of an intuitive method that we have to understand ideas in a philosophical way without the philosophical jargon. And and so that's the work that I've been tackling for the last year and a half, and through tackling it, I have got some very exciting insights into, because everyone has an opinion on this work, and if you type in Thus Spake Zarathustra, you'll see a whole host of ideas about it, but no one has isolated the meta-ethics of the work. No one has traced through the underpinning structure of which Nietzsche is talking about. And there's good reason for that. I'll read you this. This is from unpublished fragments of Nietzsche when he was writing Thus Spake Zarathustra. And it gives you an idea about why he made it so inaccessible. An age is not always worthy of reproach if it does not recognize its greatest mind and has no eye for the most amazing star that ascends out of its own night. Perhaps this star is destined to illuminate much more distant worlds. Perhaps it would even be fatal if this star were recognized too soon. It could be that the age would be distracted from its project by this star and would then, in turn, do damage to a coming age. Though leaving it with work to do that it already should have been accomplished work that is perhaps less suited to the forces of this coming age. Now, the riddle, and it is a riddle, it's a big, big riddle, this book. The riddle of Thus Spake Zarathustra was intentionally made by the author because of his profound disenchantment with the philosophical ideas, because we must remember that we are operating pre-World War One. Don't even worry about crimes against humanity and all that sort of, and all the ethical and moral ideas that have come from World War II. Not even World War One. We are operating really at the end of 2,000 years of Christian evolution that have brought these thinkers, German thinkers in particular, to a point of very sophisticated meta-ethical and phenomenological inquiry into the essence of being. And really, if you think about philosophers, you go back, I don't know, you go back 1,000 years, there weren't many of them either, right? There was just the church. So the multiple strands that have come through the Christianity over 2,000 years of a Christian psychology have then gone on to read back and inform and shape some very important ideas that this Thus Spake Zarathustra enumerates.
So how does this feed into or inform this, your newer definition of moral injury?
Okay. Before I do that, I would, to answer the question, first of all, I would like to explain the relevance. I've sort of explained the book. I just want to explain the relevance of Nietzsche's life heading up to this, because this will inform how we can even understand the book and then understand the injury. So Friedrich Nietzsche was the smartest person in Europe. He was given a full professorship, and he volunteered for active military service for Prussia. Now, when he went to war, and Nietzsche was a philosopher that did go to war, right? One of the very few people that went to war. He went as someone that had volunteered, someone that really believed what the importance of going and fighting for something and for a country and for someone. And he went to war, and it wasn't a normal battle that he fought in. It was and he went to war, he was a captain because of his previous military involvement, but he went to war as a captain and a medical orderly, right? It's very, a philosopher that goes to war as a medic, and he goes to, and the battle that he goes to is not a battle where the medics are behind the lines, goodness knows how long. He was at a battle that was called the Siege of the Metz. And this battle was Prussia, which is just a fancy word for close to Russia, which talked about sort of the German, was to become Germany, and France. And the Prussian army, which included Nietzsche, had surrounded the town of the Metz, and it was a siege. So the front line, where the ideas of the day are fought and understood, was not a front line of combat per se, but one of humanitarian values. So starvation, sickness, civilian populations, animals. Because when the siege finally ended, and the Prussians went in, they walked through a town, and there wasn't a single leaf on the trees, because all the horses, before they were eaten, and before they had run out of food, ate all the leaves on the trees, and the horses that were left were standing with all their feet together, collapsing at the sight of people. They were so weak. There was no food. It was a humanitarian disaster, right? On a monumental scale. And Nietzsche, and there was sickness everywhere. So Nietzsche is looking at dying people. He's looking at no one fighting, just people, like two Christian countries that looking at each other, and he goes, and he got back from war, and the first thing he did was renounce his citizenship. Someone that had volunteered to go and fight, he comes back from war and he says, "Whoa, I don't know what that was, but hang on a second, I need to think about it." Renounced his citizenship, and the first book he wrote was called The Birth of Tragedy. Now, 10 years later, he wrote a book called The Joyous Wisdom, or The Gay Science. And over that 10 years, the first book he ever published, The Birth of Tragedy, and then the last book at the end of 10 years, The Joyous Wisdom, the movement of tragedy, Birth of Tragedy, Joyous Wisdom. He did that without the buttresses of the state or the buttresses of religion. And at the end of that 10 years, on the dot, he had a personal, he had some very unfortunate personal circumstances, and he fled to the mountains, and he wrote in an enlightenedly manic state over 10 days, the first part of this book we're talking about. And the first lines of this book, they say, when the author was 30 years old, he left the home of his native country. That the age corresponds to when he first published his work, The Birth of Tragedy, and the age of 40 when he comes back from the mountains and gives back what he's learned. So the very first verse of Thus Spake Zarathustra is talking about his 10-year psychological solitude, trying to work out the trauma of war, that based as someone that cares in a humanitarian way about people. And this is why Nietzsche's ideas were so before their time, because he had sensitivities about the human condition that were very profound and very strong and were really unrealized. I mean, we find it difficult to comprehend, but it's only after World War II that all these humanitarian institutions have arisen, and we have this as a common doctrine. But back then, conditions weren't as we understand them today, and the ideas surrounding them.
Was he, in a sense, or directly talking about moral injury?
Yes. Okay. So the birth of tragedy, his first book. Oh, okay. His opening aphorism is, the ideas of this work are of the first working order of importance for philosophers. They deal with very deep ideas that are inspired by my writings under the walls of the Mets. It's an explicit reference once and to his wartime experiences, and he wrote, and so his writing on moral injury is explicit. He started as in his first work, and that's what every single one of his works was a work of moral injury. So that culminated after 10 years. He had a way to understand and to think about moral injury, that these ideas had crystallized for him. And after Thus Spake Zarathustra, we see some very prophetic understandings, and predictively prophetic. I mean, it's fine to be prophetic. It's a little bit scary when they're predictively prophetic. And that's what the works of Nietzsche have really. They resound so heavily in our century that's why they've drawn so much attention and why they're so important.
So, explain to us how your newer definition includes the thought of treatment, or the idea of treatment.
Yes. Okay. So Carl Jung understands, he understands a healthy a mind, or a mind that can process metaphysical or meta-ethical presuppositions in the following way. He doesn't necessarily say that he talks about a state of psychic grace. He's not saying that an unhealthy mind suffers or doesn't suffer, and a healthy mind suffers or doesn't suffer. He says, no, everyone suffers. We have a healthy mind can reach a state of psychic grace through their suffering. And this state of psychic grace that's realized through suffering is in large part due to these meta-ethical or metaphysical presuppositions or beliefs or mythologies that we believe in. So if you're thinking about a state of psychic grace in Christianity, for 2,000 years, Christians had a state of psychic grace because Christianity was different to what came before it. And the primary difference of Christianity to anything else was this concept of original sin. And if you went to a priest and said, my father, I've got moral, they wouldn't call it moral injury, either guilt or guilty about something, or my world has been, I don't understand, this has occurred and it's disrupted my ideas of the world. They would say, my son, hang on, and I do have this because it is quite an incredible. This is from the Bible. Okay, poor thing, suffering for your own sins. It's all right if you've sinned. You shouldn't have to suffer for it. Self-pity actually involves the lying to oneself. It's the result of sin and incurable without repentance. Jeremiah 30:15. Repentance from sin is the difference between self-pity and sorrow. Self-pity involves no repentance, while godly sorrow produces repentance. And what that basically means is if you went and saw the priest and he would say, why are you coming to me with this moral injury? You don't have moral injury because you are originally sinful. There is nothing for you to be distraught about. Don't take it out on yourself. Nothing to do with you. Transfer that pity of yourself into godly sorrow, and the transference of the because he said there's no need to worry about that because you're already originally sinful. That you are in a state of which you always would have been. There's nothing to worry about. Now you need to be better by aligning yourself to godly principles and understanding that that godly sorrow instead of self-sorrow is the way out and will give you repentance. And so you have a state of psychic grace. You say, well, okay, I'll do better work I will help these people, or I'll, for example, some people, I'll lash myself 5 times, right? That's godly sorrow. And that was the mechanism that resolved moral injury before before the age of psychology and psychoanalysis came onto the scene. The problem is, of course, and this is where the definition starts to get rolling, is that throughout 2,000 years of Christian thought, because if you came to a priest, Christianity, and you thought, I'm a sinner, I'm terrible, and I need to save myself, I need to save others, or I need to align myself to godly sorrow, and the way to do that is to be truthful. This is the origin of what philosophers call this will to truth that is part of Christianity. So we have the Christian mind, the Christian psyche has a will to be truthful because that truth saves our souls. Now, that will to truth that came about through this mechanism of original sin ended up biting and eating away at the foundations of Christianity because it spawned scientific revolutions. It spawned people saying, search of truth is so important because, and of course it is. And you have other religious societies that don't value truth as much or don't have the psychological mechanisms where you need to take truth very seriously. And those religions haven't gone through periods of enlightenment, or you could say separation of church and state, or separation or dissemination of religion and into society. It's not really a separation of religion and state. It's actually the dissemination of those religions into the state. And that's what our Western culture has. We have the dissemination of these great ideals into the state. And that's why the saying is God is dead, because very few people that are alive now, because our conditions are so good. They're so good. I mean, you know, we have universal suffrage, right? That we think to ourselves, you know, the people that believe in an afterlife, diminishing every generation that goes forward, less religious. And if you don't believe that you're originally sinful, and we now live in a time not of God and crimes against God, but the time of humanity and crimes against humanity, where every life is seen as irredeemably precious. And it's very difficult to understand these concepts of original sin and original profundity and preciousness of a modern culture and a modern society as we have now. So the definition, the definition, and it's not my definition, right? This is a direct quote from Nietzsche. Moral injury is a disruption to the psyche from a will to truth that has become conscious of itself as a problem in us. So moral injury wasn't a problem if you had a state of psychic grace. If you could understand your guilt or any other psychological moral injury in terms of your relationship with the divine and God and your relationship with original sin, you would reach a state of psychic grace where your suffering would be meaningful, because it's meaningful because you're sinful and God is great. And that creates meaningful suffering and a state of psychic grace. Nietzsche says that his whole work is understanding what happens when we stop believing these very fundamental presuppositions. So, and the riddle that he left for the world was, the riddle that he left, he never mentioned a cow, or he mentioned it twice in his book. But the cow is the original, and he talks about three metamorphoses: camel to lion, camel to lion to okay. The spirit is a camel. The camel becomes a lion. The lion battles a dragon and then becomes a child. But there is also a prior and a founding metaphor which frames all these other metaphors, which is the cow. And the cow is this idea of original sin, where the cow is content. I mean, that's what cows are. They're content. They're chewing on the grass of pasture. They look out into the ocean and they've got long arms, and you know, nothing really phases them. A state of psychic grace, right? And the metaphor is this: the cow eats the pasture, or the metaphysical ideas. Those metaphysical ideas produce milk. That milk is affliction. Also, that milk has these ideas. So that milk nourishes the cow, and that nourishment the cow will eat the grass. The grass is our metaphysical ideas. It produces milk. Now, this milk is it's suffering, or it's our understanding of our relationships to the divine. Mm-hmm. And once we disconnect from that, and we don't find meaning to suffering, we are like a camel. And the camel, instead of being in a herd and a creature of the herd and part of society and part of like interconnected ideas, the camel is off. It's lonesome. It's by itself. It doesn't have the pasture to be able to get sustenance, or the pasture of ideas that the cow had. But it's still got all these heavy packs of the ideas and the values of the cow that it tries to make sense of, because it's suffering for meaning. While for the cow, suffering is meaningful. For the camel, it's suffering for meaning, right? And that's what moral injury is. It's really, when you come down to it, suffering for meaning. Because if you had, so you shouldn't really. What is moral injury? I don't have any faith in the world or the arrangement of things or this, or I think I've done the wrong thing, right and wrong. All these ideas, those have come from a will to truth, because a few hundred years ago, and you further back, those ideas didn't exist. They're very happy, and everyone was happy, and to say, well, our faith is good enough, and it doesn't matter if. But then slowly, and the sun revolves around the earth, and slowly this will to truth has uncovered a level of our psychology that won't allow us to believe it anymore. Even if we say to ourselves we do, it doesn't give us that ring of that authentic ring, or that level of psychic grace that people in Christian societies used to have.
Wow. This suffering for meaning rings very loudly for me. Say more about that. This idea of.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So if you are, for a start, if things don't affect you, if you're not affected by, not everyone has moral injury, right? People will see the same thing. One person will not have a moral injury, the other person will. Nietzsche saw something as a medical orderly, and he had moral injury because his senses were more attunely connected with sensibilities that were only coming online, basically, ideas of humanity, 100 years into the future. So if you are suffering, right? You're not suffering because of the meaning of what this is. You're suffering for meaning for what you've seen, or you're suffering for the meaning that has been dislodged by what you've seen, right? It's sort of the inverse of how we're thinking about it today. It's not the meaning that's making you suffer, but it's really the lack of meaning that's making you suffer, and that is creating this idea of moral injury. Yeah.
And do you think that holds a special significance in our world now?
Oh, most certainly. So, okay, with our world today, and I have been very careful, very, very careful to not put any opinion. And I don't really I actually don't hold an opinion. I really am just reporting on reported and verified trends that are happening in society, and also the indices of society. It's not it's not a secret that the meaning, or the meaning of traditional institutions has been dissolving for some time, and through the dissolution of those meaning, those hierarchies. See, those hierarchies, they hold power. It's not to say that power doesn't exist. And when you flatten those, when you remove those hierarchies, you're getting all these shoots into new understandings or repressed ideas that were not there before. Marriage, it used to be him, her. Now it is not. Now, those ideas, those aren't new meanings. Those are the breakdown of original meanings that our society holds. Now, the new meanings that we get from those, or of inclusion, the real danger of thinking about these ideas is thinking about these ideas on top of ethical understandings and moral considerations that underpinned the old meanings, and not understanding them in relation to a new set of presuppositions, or a new idea to understand the relation of human integrity and dignity, because religion's a very hard topic, and when you and there have been sections of society that have been persecuted by these religions, or ideas of people have been persecuted by such ideas, and once they get a footing, it's very difficult for them to for such sectors or cohorts to engage in a way that has it can be very difficult, to engage in a way that really is a resounding engagement.
Dr. Timothy Shaw, his website is Great Philosophical Problems. So, Tim, as we kind of wind down here, what can therapists take from this? People who are working with trauma.
Yes. Well, the main trauma that we're all experiencing is, and it's a very personal trauma that we all experience. It's our disconnection. It's our relationship to divine ideals. Now, if you've got the trauma of everyone in relationship to their ideas of themselves, in relationship to their ideas of themselves, in relationship to what's happened to them, what they've seen, what they've done, those ideas are all related to divine precepts or presuppositions, and unraveling that that space is, I believe, a very, very exciting opportunity and place of extreme interest. Nietzsche said that his main overriding goal for the book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, was to put every sorrowful one again on firm land and firm legs. So it's an intuitively philosophical argument that doesn't intellectualize the precepts. It's a very intuitive way in which to recenter and just to help people, just to really help people. And if there's something that I can get across that I find is important to do, because Nietzsche has been associated with terrible, he was staunchly against anti-Semitism, and he's talked about it, Hitler, cause of World War I, cause of World War II. But this man, he went to war as a medical orderly. He was so upset with it. He wrote a book after 10 years of thinking about it. And that book, its main aim was to put every sorrowful one again on firm land and firm legs. And if I can say this, this is what he was thinking about when he was writing Thus Spake Zarathustra. Okay, in order to ensure my own survival, and this is for therapists as well, I have my protective instincts, contempt, disgust, indifference, that drive me into solitude. Yet in solitude, where I feel that everything is necessarily connected, every being is divine to me. And he goes on to say that what is most crucial is the feeling, who am I? Who is the other person? in relation to me, value judgments that are continually active. And so he really was a pioneer. He was a person severely misunderstood, because all his work is a metaphysics, people have bastardized it for whatever reasons they have. But his reason for his magnus opus is to put every sorrowful one again on firm land and firm legs, and it's inspired by the moral injury of war, and all his writings are inspired by the moral injury of war.
Tim, what is the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Through the website.
And that is greatphilosophicalproblems.com. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. You're on Twitter also? Okay. Dude, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a crazy hour over there, but you are you exude a passion for this work that is undeniable. And I just want to thank you for being here today.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.